In this episode, I am joined by Katarina Falkenberg and Tommy Westlund, alchemists, practitioners of Western Esotericism, and authors of Alchemy, the Divine Work. Katarina and Tommy detail the stages and methods of the spiritual path of Western alchemy. They explain the movement through 4 phases, describe the operations employed during each, and reveal the signs of progress that indicate success. Katarina and Tommy reveal how to pray to the Madonna, how to purify karma, how to work with fire and emotions such as anger and sadness, the role of tinctures and elixirs, and methods of astral travel and archetypal work. Katarina and Tommy also consider the power of the imagination, the interaction with external alchemical operations, and inner personal refinement, and recount stories of entity encounters and reality creation. So without further ado, Katarina Falkenberg and Tommy Westlund. Katarina Falkenberg and Tommy Westlund, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
I'm so pleased to be talking with you again. I so enjoyed our first episode in which we discussed the new publication of the English language version of your book, Alchemy, the Divine Work. So I will say thanks for that episode and congratulations still on its publication. It's still quite recent. Only the last few months it's been out. How's it going? How's it being received?
Yeah,
it's been received very well, I think.
It was sort of available since last October, November, but the archons in the Amazon world has made it more difficult for people, depending on where they live. But it works more or less smooth. And we last time we had our joint talk, we celebrated winter solstice. So what better way to celebrate the vernal equinox than talking with you, Steve?
That's a good point. We do keep meeting on these special days of the year. What do you make of that?
It's a sign.
Well, yeah, it's entirely unintentional on my part. So last time we ended with you giving a sort of philosophical overview of 4 stages of the alchemical path, a sort of lead to gold process. Chapter 20 of Alchemy, the Divine Work covers that in quite a bit of depth. And you gave a sort of philosophical view, and by that I mean a view of how those stages apply to one's own stage of life, or maybe to one's own overall practice arc. But what we didn't talk about, and what we had planned to talk about, or hoped to talk about today, was the practical aspect. The practices involved in traversing those 4 stages, how the practice changes, if it does, as you move through those stages. There are certain practices in the book: contemplation, meditation, imagination, and so on. And there are very interesting ways in which they're applied. So I wonder if we might then revisit this topic of the alchemical path per se, and how it is, in terms of its practices and so on, that one traverses it.
And then we have to start with the Prima materia, I think, because that's the beginning of the whole work. So working with Prima materia is the alchemical way to get into this primordial consciousness. And you can do it in different ways, but a very good starting point is learning the skill of meditation.
Learning the skill of meditation, but also learning the various skills of breathing exercises from an alchemical perspective, to awaken the prima materia is to awaken the divine spark within us. And that divine spark is vivified by conscious breathing, whether it's heavy fire breathings or more soft breathings, but breathing the way that the whole, not only the physical body, but the soul and the spirit breathes together as one.
And this prime matter consciousness is, in a psychological way, it's going back to childhood, and to the little child that has all these possibilities in the world, but haven't chosen the direction yet. So it's also good to have a practice and do some therapy. So you can work also with your mind and your psyche. So that's also a starting point, going back to childhood and this consciousness that is also hopefully very curious about life. And that is also the alchemical fire to start to evolve and to start the individuation process.
And the art of contemplating and meditating upon alchemical emblems and illustrations, and creating this alchemical magical space where the emblem and you become one. So in the beginning, you sit down or in a posture, or lay down and visualize alchemical illustrations and just breathing them into your own being until the point where you are actually exploring them from within. You are becoming that alchemical emblem. You don't necessarily have to comprehend it or understand the processes of it, but you are identifying more and more and awakening this eros aspect in your being towards the path.
And then in a more, let's say, metaphysical way, this prima materia consciousness is the consciousness in the beginning of all incarnation. And we have the symbol of the rebis with two heads, a female and a masculine head and one body. And it's quite difficult for students to understand this prima materia consciousness. But if you think that it's more of a frequency or a vibration that you can come into contact with meditation and breathing exercises, then it's a little bit easier to connect to this primordial consciousness.
And in the both alchemical Western tradition and various other esoteric traditions in the West, you come in contact with that consciousness by visiting and praying to Black Madonna, usually in one of the magnificent cathedrals or churches around Europe, to have this contact with the Black Mother, the mother beyond the veil of life and death, to, as Katarina said, come in contact with this pure, innocent state of consciousness that we were all born with and born from.
And this Black Madonna, we have it in the Western tradition or in the Christian tradition, but we also have her in Eastern tradition as Hinduism and as Kali. So we have it in the Celtic tradition. So she's an archetype that is connecting all different traditions on earth. That's why it's a very good starting point to work with this Black Mother.
And what is that process of prayer?
The process of prayer, when we teach our students, actually the first weekend when we have students for a 3-year-old course, they are taught not how to, but they're taught to write their own prayer to their understanding of the Black Madonna. And obviously this prayer will look very differently, whether they are Christian, whether they are Jewish, whether they are Islamic, Eastern traditions, or agnostic or atheist. But so first we have to have a couple of hours of lectures trying to make it easier to comprehend the nature of the Black Madonna from the consciousness perspective. And then everyone has to write their own hymn, their own prayer. So they start trying to put down into words that which words cannot really encapture. But the idea is to open the heart more and more, so that the heart will open itself and as you breathe, as you inhale and exhale, it becomes this prayer, hopefully with some beautiful words that connects you to the Black Madonna or the primordial mother.
And also we use, of course, imagination to get in contact with this Black Madonna. And we use imagination as whole the way through the Opus Magnum. And it's a quite interesting consciousness, but because we see it as a consciousness that is between the outer world and the inner world. And if you first practice meditation, you can learn how to come in contact with this more central self consciousness. And then when you use imagination, you don't go into, you know, the ego or the fantasies, but you can come into contact with this self-consciousnness and then go into this in-between area between the outer and the inner world. And what's good about that, it's a experience, but also a laboratory process, because you can see that when you work in this space in between the worlds, something happens in the outer world. So then you don't have to, you know, have faith in the Black Madonna or have faith in alchemy. You work in here and you see the changes in the outer world. And that's also the alchemical standpoint all over. You have to work, you have to practice. It's a laboratory and you see what happens.
And what sort of things might the practitioner notice in, you said changes in the outside world, seeing what happens? What sort of things might the practitioner notice?
Well, generally speaking, a first true, genuine contact with the Black Madonna or the primordial mother tends to break down so many of the shatters we have built up through life, through maturing, through enduring, because this living archetype sees us for what we really are and becomes a mirror for us, so we dare to look much, much deeper within, much, much deeper beyond. And that's a wonderful, blissful, frightening experience. And we have had many such encounters with both during the classes we teach, but also when we do alchemical journeys around Europe, and people who are quite agnostic and not believing in anything, after spending some time with the Black Madonna, they completely not disintegrates, but certain of their armors disintegrates, and they get in touch with long lost memories, long lost feelings, and crying becomes a way of purification and also of joy, because they have recalled something they didn't even know they had lost, because they hadn't any sort of memories about it.
And also when you work in this alchemical room, we call it, the in-between the worlds, you know, when you work with your karma, everyone wants to, you know, release the karma and get a better life. And as we see it in alchemy, you don't have to do it in the outer world. You can do it in this world in between. And it's not easy. It's not just you're fast, you do it and then it's happening in the outer world. But when you work and give your, you know, life to this process, you can see, you can work with your childhood traumas or, you know, problem with the boss on the job. And when you do it and you see and you get into contact, what is your problem beyond all this, then you can do it in this alchemical room. And then when you go to work, it's a different workplace, because your perspective, your subject is working on this outer world and it's changing. So that's why you can see the differences. You don't have to believe that it's working. You see the changes in the outer world, and that's a lovely thing to recognize.
Is there a model for that karmic work? Theoretical model for that? I'm thinking of certain Buddhist traditions that some of which take difficulties in life and so on to be ripening of previously implanted bad karmic seeds, negative karma. And so there's whole mind training methods of taking obstacles or difficulty onto the path, or for example taking sickness onto the path, or various other things, one's economic situation onto the path, and working with it, relating to it as a sort of purification process, and sometimes accelerating, in fact. So that's a Buddhist notion that I'm somewhat aware of. Is there a similar notion or theory in the alchemical world?
Indeed.
Yeah. And we also have this work that this meditation practice that we inhale suffering and exhale love. And you can do it with your own suffering, but you can also do it for others. And I feel when I'm also working with alchemical sessions with people, and often I can of free will inhale the suffering and exhale the love. And then we are changing the karma both for all the people in the room in that way. So that is I wouldn't say simple, but a very potent way to change the karmic wheel.
And if we're talking about the work relating to the phases, this becomes really an important work in the yellow phase of Citrinitas in alchemy, because up to that point you have tried to purify yourself, strengthen yourself, balancing yourself in various ways. But in this yellow work, it becomes so important to, from an alchemical perspective, realize that everything that happens to you is a result of the divine providence trying to point something out to you. So if you meet someone who's really angry, that reflects an anger within you. And the way you can deal with it outer person or outer topic relates to how much you can purify and dissolve this anger within you, or sickness or sadness, etc. And then you start realizing that instead of believing that this esoteric path, this hermetic path, will just bring you to bliss, joy, happiness, and eternal life, it will instead broadcast everything that you haven't worked through. You could say your karmic aspects, your karmic relationships, and it will be impossible for you to sit and meditate and believe that, well, now I am enlightened. Now I have reached this pure state of bliss or this state of consciousness. If I'm still having sickness within my body or soul or spirit, if I'm still encountering people that triggers various reactions in me, that's the alchemical tool I need to integrate. So the whole interaction with the world, both the visible and the invisible world, becomes the alchemical tools because it displays to us what we haven't worked through and released.
Yeah. And then we are coming into from the prima materia into this Nigredo phase, that learning projection is important, yeah. And also we have a saying in alchemy that you have to put the hermetic seal on yourself. And that means that when you get triggered about other people, angry, sad, happy, whatever, you can put this seal on yourself, and instead of trying to project it on others, or take it in and get burned out or depressed, you can breathe through this feeling. And that's a very important alchemical operation, to breathe with a wrath or anger or sadness. But you have to put this on, but not to put it down in the subconscious or not get it out, but you have to work with it. So everything that you are meeting out in the world, when you get this learning about projection, you can work with everything without you. But just putting this seal on top of your head and breathe it out, you can see that feelings are changing through that process. And if you do it, you can often you can see it's just a little short time you have to do this breathing process and imagination process. So that's also a thing in the Nigredo phase. But mostly also we work in Nigredo with the 7 planets, or the 7 seals, or the 7 chakras in Eastern tradition. And we have these alchemical Gestalt operations. It's very interesting because you can see the 7 seals, similar to the Eastern ones. But instead of trying to work with them up and down to transcend the world, you have to work with them in this way, in a circular way, and get into the heart, for that's the most important seal as a human being, because in alchemy we are the medium between the above and the below, and the heart is this point that you can be whole both on earth and with the heaven or divine.
And the Gestalt diagram of the actually unenlightened man or unenlightened human is often described as being an indication that also the Western world works with the chakras. In Gestalt, who was a follower of Jacob Boehme and the early Theosophical movement in Europe, realized that, and this obviously is something that the Western world had worked with before, but he put it really in the body, that we are governed by these 7 forces, the 7 planetary forces. So we have Saturn as the crown chakra.
Yeah.
We have Jupiter, we have Mars, we have the Sun, we have Venus, Mercury to the Moon or Luna. And the unenlightened person, according to Gestalt and the early Theosophical movement, was ruled by these planetary forces. And the Western tradition has a long way of explaining how the planets are dual forces. They have both a light aspect and a dark aspect. Also relating to the Kabbalistic tradition of the 7 vowels, which either has a hard or soft pronunciation. And these two within the alchemical tradition shows that the soul always has this dualistic principle of light and darkness within the same living archetype, the same living planet, or the same living metal within us. And that's very much of the most important work in the Nigredo phase, to awakening these 7 seals or the 7 planetary spheres of consciousness, and realizing that Saturn has both this extremely positive side to it, which we tend to
forget
or only want to focus on, but it also had this very dark and heavy aspect that we need to purify. And by working, as Katarina said, with these 7 spheres in our body in a circular way, so it always ends in the heart where the sun is placed, becomes an exercise where we utilize both a heartful prayer and imagination and identification with the planetary sphere. You can work with we can explain it through the Western tradition archangels, but in the book we wanted to make it as easy as possible. So just have one vocal that you intonate. So you utilize your magical alchemical voice and your visualization, and you can invoke deities or archangels, as you said, to really awakening this sphere of consciousness.
And we also use sound, bells and this fork. I think it's called forks, when you so we use different methods to really get these seals to awake and expand and being more whole. Because in alchemy, we don't want this light and darkness to be just light. We want to transcend these two levels, the light and the darkness. And there we work a lot with the archangels because they can help us to transcend these two opposites. So that's a very important work during Nigredo. And we do it all the way through the opus, but we do it in a different setting or expression.
But the combination of the prayer, of imagination, of breathing exercises that, in a sense, both awakenings and purifies our physical body and awakenings our soul, and making it easier for us to comprehend the light and the dark aspects of our soul, makes us then transcend this black phase of Nigredo, where we all quite often feel enlivened, we feel vivified, we feel that we, through meditation practices and various other practices, really can breathe life into the dark matter, both within our own soul and psyche and in the world.
And in this Albedo phase, then it's from working a lot with the 7 seals, we now try to get the Mercurial consciousness. So it's much more focusing on light and darkness, or good and evil, to get this consciousness that is combining the two of them. And also starting working with your holy guardian angel and get to know your holy guardian angel, or you can call it your higher self, or it's archetype in different traditions. But to get to know this principle that has been with you from the beginning of time. And as we see it with the angels, they are not forcing their power on us. We have to ask for it. So it's much about to want to work with the guardian angel or the higher self that is important in this white phase.
Yeah, so the difference then is in the black phase, sorry, there are notifications coming up.
Lovely.
If you remember, the same thing happened last time.
I do recall, yes.
Yeah, it's something with this computer. After 15, 20 minutes, it wants to launch Adobe. And,
oh, no.
Yeah.
So where were we?
You were making a comparison between the Nigredo phase and the Albedo phase.
Yeah.
So in the Nigredo phase, we work very much with matter, within matter, in the own dark depths of our psyche, the dark depths of our soul, but trying to get this primordial fire starting to vivify it and to enlighten the darkness. And then, as Katarina said, the white phase of Albedo is much more transcending matter. So through various techniques, both imagination, visualization techniques, breathing exercises, prayers, we seek this contact with the above.
And we also work a lot with the astral body. And in the beginning, you have to learn to get to know your astral body, this body from the stars, this body that doesn't die, but you have to enlighten this body, you have to heal this body. So that's also a very important practice. And start to learn to project your astral body, to travel with your astral body in many different ways. So that's also a practice. And I would say also the most practical practice in this albedo phase, it's starting to work with herbs. Connect to nature, to get to know the different herbs, to start making more easier alchemical tinctures. It's not an elixir yet, but to work with herbs, to combine herbs, to work with the different archetypes when you're doing these tinctures. So that's also a very practical thing to do in this albedo phase, the white phase.
Because it's always so much easier, instead of just reading and contemplating or meditating, you can actually set up very easy experiments where you separate the soul spirit from herbs through quite easy processes and see how the soul spirit leaves the herb or this salt aspect, and tinctures, that is colors, the menstruum, which in this case could be pure alcohol. And from an alchemical perspective, you can then see that if you work with certain herbs and the tincture becomes very red, that's the color of the soul of this herb. And you can work with it in front of you, and then you start to experience how this is a mirror of your own purification process of your soul, starting transcending from the body and reconnecting with the spiritual principle.
And in that way, we also work a lot with distillation, starting to know the knowledge how to make this menstruum or mercure, this clear menstruum. And we have these courses in herbal alchemy, and it's very lovely when we are standing here doing the process in our alchemical apparatus, that also people can do it within themselves, with breathing and with meditation and with exercise. So you also get to know how can you distill within yourself and without. And it's much better way than just learn people or teach them this is distillation within. Here you can do it yourself, and you can practice. And then we have this alchemical path that it's within and without, and they are going together. And then you can see when something is turbulent within you or turbulent within your room, you have to be careful with the apparatus that they work as well. So it's also this experiment all the time, but also very funny and lovely. We do it often, this distillation, and we work with different herbs, and you can see Tommy's doing the red wine on the moon phases, so we have our own wine and then distill it and working with different herbs. It's a very rejuvenated practice within alchemy, because you get so much back when you're working with these old traumas, or anything that is very hard. It's also quite you get quite tired, but with alchemy and the herbal world and distillation, you get the energy back. So working with nature is the most wonderful thing to do during whole the divine work, I think.
And it's also extremely, I mean, obviously I agree with everything Katarina said, but it's so refreshing and fun to be able then to produce, and in this case, an elixir that you have worked with from the beginning and scratch. You have infused it with archetypal powers and working with various of herbs, getting it through all the alchemical operations, and then Mm.
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 And when you drink, you also use your imagination, because if you sense that you are an open grail that is taking this in, you help the elixir to get through all, different levels in yourself. So it's also every time you have this imagination to help whatever you take from the outside in also.
And we talked before about the 7 seals. So now when I actually took the elixir, I could focus it on each one of the 7 seals, so I could sense how this elixir worked within both body, soul, and spirit. And some people, especially here in Sweden, tend to ask us, well, I understand you have invoked this god or this goddess and you work with herbs, but do you actually believe it? And say, well, you don't have to believe it. Does it taste good? That's a proof in itself. And the more you embrace the archetypical world, the more you will also embrace the capacity to have it to work within yourself on so many different layers. And also not only with the physical body, but as Katarina said, with the astral body and also with the etheric body, you can sense that this elixir or tincture vibrates currents within your whole being that will help you, assist you, and aid you in your alchemical work.
And then from Albedo, we are going forward to this Citrinitas, the yellow phase, that is, it has been forgotten in many traditions, even in alchemy, because this phase, you're taking these souls that are connected with spirit in the white phase, you're taking that back to earth again. And many traditions just want to leave the earth, to transcend, to be enlightened, and then never come back here again. But in alchemy, now you have to go back. And you do the same with your herbal tinctures. In the first albedo phase, you do these tinctures, so you get out the soul in the herb to the mercure and have this tincture. But now in the Citrinitas phase, you work with spagurics. And that means you get this tincture when you take out the soul from the herb, and you have this lovely tincture, but you don't leave the old herbal materia or throw it away. You work with the materia now. So you start to burn the materia, you start to wash the materia until it's just a white salt left. And then when it's this white salt, you give it back to the tincture. So now the elixir has both spirit, soul, but also the transformed or the transmuted body back. And that's why these elixirs are much more potent when you use them.
And it's an extremely fun process and alchemical operations to work with.
Yeah.
Because if you're working with fire and you're actually working with your oven and focusing fire from above, igniting the fire within this herbal material that is dying, and you're taking this mass through a decay process, you feel and sense your own relationship to dying and decay, both from a physical perspective and from a soul perspective. And you can also, instead of being afraid of this dying process, you realize that this is just a way to igniting this process in a very fast way. But this process happens around us all the time in nature, and we are, as human beings, all going through this life and death and decaying process. So it can often become new idea of soul searching where you relate to or understand your own feelings about death and rebirth. What are your beliefs about the physical death? What happens after that? You will actually start seeing this in the decaying mass that is slowly burning.
Mm-hmm. So from Albedo, it's more delicate process with creating this tincture, but in the Citrinitas though, with this spagyric practice, you also can, you know, take up your wrath, your anger, your sadness, and use it in this operation. Because when we do the operation, when we are burning, in the beginning, it's so wet, so it starts to rotten, like a putrefaction operation. And then you can go on with the fire, and more this old dark water is starting to burn off. And you can also feel it within you. So when you have this, let's say this winter time, dark depression, you are feeling a bit wet, and not at all. It's dark emotions, it's wet emotions. When you're doing this process, you also can feel that this is happening within. So that's what I think is so wonderful with alchemy. You can use anything, the dark, depression, the rotten, everything is usable if you have the clue, the key, the operation, how to work with it. And that is a wonderful thing, I think.
And you become wet.
And you could, but soon you will become fire.
And obviously this relates to many of the world's esoteric traditions, that you have to meditate and contemplate upon the processes of decaying, the processes of dying, to nurture your own feelings relating to that, and eventually both purifying those feelings and becoming free from those feelings, because it's happening all around us, but we as human beings, for whatever reason, believes that we are immortal and that we won't go through these decaying processes. So both, obviously, the Eastern and the Western traditions have many such practices, but from the alchemical perspective, it's very wonderful to be able to see this in a very short span of time without yourself, and then being able to mirror yourself in those practices and see what happens next, because the death is not the end in this alchemical operation. Death only produces this pure white salt. You can see it as the white skeletons in alchemical illustrations and drawings, where the decaying flesh has separated from the skeleton, and that becomes the pure crystals. So we could describe it as the pure DNA of the herb that is then being integrated and remarried with the purified soul and spirit principle.
And it's also a nice practice because you can work with different archetypes with the elixir. I remember I worked with the reintegration of the dark angel for some years ago. And it was such a problem to get this herb materia being white again. Final alchemical product took such long time because these dark wings didn't want to become white. And then it was a very, very good learning for me, even though I've been working for such repeated long times. Doing the elixir, I'd have to have much patience. And that is a very good learning to know. Working with dark archetypes or dark angel, in this fall Lucifer, you have to be very, very patient. And in the end, there was white wings or white salt coming from this, but it took sometimes it takes a month, but this one was, for half a year, and then it was ready. But this was an excellent, so wonderful elixir to work with, both for us, but also for the students.
And working with purifying the herbal moss to white salt, also from an alchemical perspective, exemplifies both the nature of imagination and the magic of imagination. Because if you're only trying to work with the fire with a dead moss and do not connect with it, it will not become white. You will have to embrace it and enclose it within your own sphere of sensation, opening up your own being to include this mass, because that is when you can start working with the mass from within of yourself. And we have done it many times with people that they are trying to make this herbal mass white, and it becomes black, it becomes gray, and nothing more happens. And then we can just, by embodying it within ourselves, make it white in a very, very short span of time. So this is also part of the imagination technique that you have worked with then for several years, that it's not only something that happens when you close your eyes and see this world within, it's also the capacity of embracing something within, without yourself, and including that object in your own process, and making these two different topics become one. So you can, instead of igniting it from a fire without, you are embracing it and working with breathing exercises, for example, or inhaling the telluric fire forces from the earth within, and you can see the result without. And at that point, people don't have to believe anymore, because they can see the result. The result, if you utilize the techniques you have been taught and that you have been practicing on a daily basis, if you have learned them well, you can just use this key and see that it will make a result in the outer. And if you can make such a difference in the outer with this simple exercise or alchemical operations of calcinatio, then you understand that you can do this in all areas of your life.
So in this Citrinitas phase, though, much spagyrics, but also a very important topic is this quaternity consciousness. So from working with the 7 in the Nigredo, and then this combining the 2 in Albedo, we now start with 4 principles. And then we can see that as souls, we have 2 light, feminine and masculine principles. And we have 2 dark, feminine and masculine principles. And we can do it in a psychological way. We can work with energies. We can see the full moon, the full sun, the dark moon, and the solar, vad heter det? The dark sun. Solniger. So you can do it in many different ways, but always with this energy work at the same time, the meditation, the imagination, and breathing. And then you try to, in different ways, psychological, energetic, or soul, in a soul way, try to combine these 4 into one, and then we get the quintessence, quinta essentia, and that is also an expression for yourself or your divine spark within you.
So working with this 4 in the quaternity makes the soul become bigger. we are learning how to enflame ourselves through prayer and through practice and work, so that our soul embraces more and more of creation. And from a Western tradition, especially from a Christian tradition, you have three archetypes. You have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But we are working very much with the quaternity. So we have, instead of having the light and the darkness above and beyond, we have the light as the masculine and as the feminine, and we have the darkness as the masculine, as the feminine. So we, with our soul and also with our physical being, we become this cross of Saint Andrew, and that is then a reflection of how the soul is more and more infused by the solar power from the yellow Citrinitas phase. And this is the transition from the lunar consciousness of the previous phases to the solar consciousness. You could say from one perspective, it's the beginning of the enlightenment process. It's not an end result, it's just this growing expansion where the soul embraces more and more above and more below.
Yeah, and then you can work with different traditions. So we work a lot with the Egyptian tradition, because they have so good archetypes to work with, and we can invoke these archetypes. And then we have these upper archetypes are Osiris and Isis, and we have Nephthys and Set. They are all even siblings. So that's a very good tradition to work with. And then we try to get a good condition for this divine child, or the Horus child, to giving birth to that. But we can also, in a good way, work with the Gnostic tradition. It's excellent for this work, because you have the Christ, you have the Sophia, but you also have a demiurge, and you have Achamat. So that's a good quadruple to work with, to come to this divine child consciousness.
Or you could say that you are manifesting and projecting the four elements within your being. And when you have the fire, water, air, earth separated like this, it can become this vibrant current that gives birth to the quinta essentia, the fifth element in your heart.
And then you can go out in the nature for this work and work with the elementals, like Paracelsus. So that's a very good way to go beyond the psychological or spiritual way, to get into these subtle bodies where you can see and meet these elemental beings. And then you have the undines for water, you have salamanders for fire, and you have the gnomes for earth, and elvens, or what heter de?
Elves.
Elves for
Fairies.
fairies for the
Air.
air. So that's also a very good way to you know, to come into the subtle bodies and work with the etheric body. Because if Albedo was much about this astral body, in Citrinitas we work a lot to heal the etheric body.
And quite a few years ago, we had a magical journey during the pandemic, so we couldn't go abroad in Europe. We for 3 years in a row, we went to different castles around Stockholm and did alchemical and magical operations. And one of those very forgotten castles that is actually really close to where we are has this, we would say, enchanted forest really close to it, and surrounding an old lake with remains from 10-15 thousand years ago, and also remains from the Viking tradition, etc. So this has been utilized in many, many ways throughout the ages. And we talked about meeting the elemental principles, as Katarina described them. And obviously, when you read Paracelsus or when you read someone, you can perhaps agree to, okay, if I sit down and close my eyes and meditate, I can envision the sylphs as a representation for the fire, or the undines for water.
Air.
Ja, sylphs
Yeah.
the salamanders then for fire. But in this extremely magical etherical landscape in Stockholm, we actually were given a gift to see them as representations in physical beings together with a group of 20 people. And we have been talking about they actually have a place that is called, you have huge building blocks from the Ice Age, and it's called jättekast, the castings from giants. And when we were doing a ceremony there, then suddenly a man walks who's around 240 in height. It's the tallest man we've ever seen after we have been meditating upon giants. And this extremely impressive person walked by. Some minutes later, we had visitations from all the elemental kingdoms.
And the interesting thing, we were going to do a ritual in the very sacred environment with Pan. And the first day we saw this Pan, it was like Pan getting out from the forest. Everyone saw it. And he was very sad and grumpy and not happy at all. But then the day after, when we made this Pan ritual from Thine Fortune, he came towards us so happy. So it was very funny because our, the children's mind, the playfulness came alive within all the groups. So that's also a wonderful thing to do, working with elementals and have respect for the elementals is very important, because when you work with divine archetypes or archangels, they are quite, willing to help you. But when you're working with elementals, you have to be very, very respectful and give them also something in back. So it's a interesting work to do with these elemental beings.
And that's really a good example for what happens when you are working with the Citrinitas yellow face in alchemy. These inner visions and inner archetypes you will more and more meet also in the outer world. And obviously, I'm not saying that that person was a giant, but to us, he represented a giant because he was the tallest man I've ever seen. And like the other archetypes we met, we had opened up our magical alchemical eyes and realized that this is not just processes within ourselves. These are living archetypes that we all can envision and get to know. And that makes the yellow work so much fun. And
and so much real.
And so much real. And we talked about it, I think, last time, that you can't really escape from your thoughts and feelings in the yellow work. And this is a result of that also, the more positive aspect, that when you're working with magically and alchemically, you will have this imprints in matter, both within and without. And the whole of creation becomes living, and everything that happens is a result of a conscious or unconscious dialogue between yourself and creation.
Very
Shall
interesting.
we? Yeah?
Very interesting indeed. Yes, please do continue. The reddening phase.
Well, I think we shall move on to Rubedo, the red face. If we have when we are talking about the subtle bodies, we are working with the astral body a lot in Albedo and the etheric body much in Citrinitas, and also trying to heal this etheric body by, you know, taking back all our different personalities, taking back different lives, going back to childhood, and take back parts of ourselves that are not, you know, we had a godkänt. Approved by the higher mind. But now in the Rubedo phase, you want these two bodies to come together. It's very good explained in the Egyptian culture, where you can see this Kaaba aspect or Kaaba soul or Kaaba body is an expression of Osiris mostly. And we have this Ba soul or Ba body, it's an expression of Isis. And when you can see that they are united, it's a thing that you unite the Ka and the Ba, and then you get the Kaaba bird, like Kaaba. And that is also this divine child, or the Horus child, or the sun and moon's hermaphroditic child. But you do it in very energetic ways, and with different works that you can get these two bodies to become one.
And we have it in various myths. We have it as Michael and the dragon in the Christian tradition, and from an alchemical perspective, the archangel Michael is not supposed to kill the dragon. The dragon is not supposed to kill Michael, but they are to unite, purified through these alchemical phases and process and operation, meaning that I, as the microcosm, unite with this macrocosmic archetype, both in its light and in its dark aspects. From the Egyptian tradition, we have the chaotic god Set trying to murder the sibling Horus, and through aeons they are not allowed to murder each other through the interference of Isis, because Horus and Set has to become one. They have to combine their forces of night and day, of light and darkness, of chaos and order. And then you have, not throughout the whole Egyptian period, but through a certain Egyptian period, you have this combined figure of Horus and Set. One body and two different heads, seeing that this is now the reintegrated chaos, this reintegrated destructive side working in harmony or in dynamic with the light side of Horus. And that's very much what the Rubedo phase of alchemy wants to inspire in us. It's never been about rejecting the dark principle. It's always been purifying and reintegrating that. But now in the Rubedo phase, it's doing that from a very, very more macrocosmic perspective. And that is extremely strong, powerful, energetics. And you need to have purified and become conscious about so much of your darker aspects of your soul, because the dark aspects of the soul wants to identify and invoke this macrocosmic destructive dark forces, because they are extremely vivifying. So that from that perspective, you understand why you need to have periods of fasting, both in when it comes to eating, drinking, prayer, purifications, etc. Everything leading to a more profound insight of one's own shadow qualities, so that that shadow will not embrace the macrocosmic shadow. But you have first integrated the shadow and the light within, and then you're seeking to make the same marriage without.
Mm. So in a way, it's a different way to perceive things, and you change by working with this living myth. You work with changing your mind, your intellect. You get to know these traditions, but you also change your feelings, how you feel about this, especially this dark aspect. But in the end, also working with the energies, with the astral and etherical body, and how you combine them also with what we call in the Egyptian tradition, the arch soul, or the divine name. So we get to know this, what is our true mission. And that is an operation. So it's not in your mind. It's not a meditation, but it's more an operation where you really can feel these different subtle bodies, how they combine. And there we have this Kaaba bird or Ark bird, or what we say is the way towards the stone of the wise, or the diamond body in the Eastern tradition, in the tantric traditions, Vajrayana tradition. That is the same goal, that you get to know and to create this immortal body, that you can go through the veil between living and dying with the whole consciousness integrated. So that is the end goal, and I think that is the same goal, at least in the Vajrayana, the diamond way tradition. So that is a similar, when you also see this diamond body as this rainbow body. And you can, when you work with imagination and energy operation, you can see, feel, sense, become this being of rainbow light. So in the end, we have an Eastern and a Western tradition, but in the end, from us as an alchemical view, we can see that these are going together in the end, like this immortal body, or golden body, we call it. Because Westerners, we want to have gold. But Easterners, they realize, no, immortality is much, much better than just gold. But it's the same thing.
Fascinating. Fascinating indeed. I'm curious, when one moves through these from one stage to the next, are there signs or evidences of having completed one stage to go to the next? Or is it something your teacher tells you, or is there how does one know when it's time to move from phase 1 to phase 2?
Yeah, that's a good question, because if you have a teacher, obviously it becomes more easier to some extent. But as a general rule, there are various stages of consciousness and various stages of comprehension and understanding that you will more often than not understand yourself. And you will see suddenly a huge difference in the way that you approach the work, the world, and yourself. And the way you also can understand the alchemical illustrations and alchemical teachings of old and of new, and see how they resonate with it. And in alchemy, we describe it as permanent states of consciousness that differ very, very much from each other. And the difference is that anyone can, through quite simple meditation techniques, achieve an insight into the state of consciousness. But after the meditation, they are back in their normal way of thinking and feeling. So the glimpses are only glimpses, but the more you work with it, the glimpses become a bigger and bigger reality until they are the reality that you work from. And that, from an alchemical perspective, is the stage where you have mastered this phase, or you have mastered this wedding, or you have mastered this alchemical stone or alchemical body.
Yeah, because now we are trying to make it a bit simple by talking about the phases. But that is, yeah, it's the first, how to get to know the opus. But then you work with same phases, but in a different, more deeper or higher level. And then you work with the different weddings. It's similar archetypes, similar projects to work with, but in a more manifest way. And when you have done that, you work with the different alchemical bodies. So you're going deeper and deeper and deeper, but also more manifest consciousness, as Tommy said. So that's why when you get to know the opus, maybe you don't when you're working with Citrinitas, you don't recreate or transform your whole world. But then you're working with a yellow wedding. Some things are happening. And then you are coming to the transfiguration, the angelic body or the Mercurial angelic body. Then you can see a big difference. But when you were asking, I was also thinking about a personal thing for me, just working with this transfiguration process from Citrinitas, the yellow wedding, and the angelic body. It was for me when I was writing my second novel. It's been for such a long time, but it will be ready this year. But my first novel, I was writing, down all the alchemical. I took episodes from my life and then creating it in a fictional way. But then when I started to work the other book, it was so strange because everything I wrote happened afterwards. So that was quite scary at sometimes because I couldn't, I want to do a happy life and just write that. I have to be true to my daimon or my inner genius or creativity when I was writing. So it was so strange that it wasn't exactly the same, but almost the same way happened 1 year or 2 years later. And now it's been 17 years working on this book, this alchemical and Kabbalistic book. And it's quite funny because Tommy said that when people are reading this book, they say, but this is Katarina's life. But it wasn't. It became my life. And that is for me, when you're recreating reality or transfiguration of the matrix, the etheric body or the etheric world, then you can create this reality. And it can be scary, but for me, it was an epiphany of what you can do with alchemy in this stage of Citrinitas, yellow wedding, and angelic body.
And that is sort of not the end product, but the aim of the alchemical tradition, that you are becoming a free being that is able to create your own universe. And first we have to create our own world, like Katarina, but your book is also not only a world, it is a universe that then manifests in this creation. And if you are able to do that, which many alchemists have described from different perspectives, that is like when we talked about the calcinatio aspect, when you're embracing your consciousness and seeing this happening outside of yourself. You have been in this creative process of writing and then seeing it manifesting. And I know you talked to me and were afraid to write certain chapters because you really didn't want them to happen in the outer life, and they did.
Yeah.
That is certainly a true stage of the alchemical free consciousness that are not bound by the old patterns, but are able to create a new pattern, a new matrix. And obviously it's easier or more fun to do that through creative processes, through writing, through painting. But that is just an expression of this quality within.
And your life is your, the most important creative project for me. So that's why also you can work with yourself like you are a painting or a book or a creative project, and that is a very funny way to work with yourself, and not so hard on yourself, but seeing it as an expression, a project that you are seeking to realize the divine within. But I will also say that for us, it's important, but when you get to have these possibilities in the world to create the matrix, it's very important that you have this alchemical red phase, rubedo, or the red wedding. We can see it in the resurrection of Christ, for example, or the solar body, that you realize that you, in the end, are a servant to the divine. You are free, but you are also a servant to divine. So you don't get into this ego thing or dark alchemy or dark magic, that you want to take the place of the divine or want to be like the source. So that's very, very important when you get more and more powers to work with. So we emphasize that a lot at educations.
And I think that's that's always the problems with us as human beings, that we have to realize the nature of our own ego. And we can go through various operations and phases where the ego dies, but the ego has a fascinating quality to be immediately reborn on a later stage. And and that's also regarding which operation or which phase or which alchemical body you're working with in alchemy. You have to we're not trying to completely annihilate the ego. The ego must be trained to become this focal point of our own alchemical consciousness. So you could say that we have our flaming heart, that everything must be based within. And then we have our awakened higher self, and the ego then becomes the focal point of the will or the imagination. The problem obviously is when the ego believes that it is the source of everything. And that's the most difficult block to work with, and that's why we work with so many mythologies and various internal and external exercises to not doom the ego, or trying to believe that I'm completely egoless now. I've completely annihilated my ego, so I'm the best in the world. Because that will so often be the case.
Yeah.
So the alchemical tradition has, I'm sure the Eastern has many, many more of these checking points. So you need constantly to reflect and contemplate and mediate between yourself and this newly created ego that again takes a fresh life
Mm.
and inhale it back.
Mm.
But
So you die and you resurrect all the time, like the phoenix bird, but you do it willingly. That's the difference. In the end of the opus, we walk willingly into this fire and destruction and come out again newborn. But you have to do it all the time. So it's not, yeah, now it's, you know, I'm a divine human being or a guru or something. And I think that is also quite nice with the alchemical tradition, because we don't have these popes, we don't have these gurus that we have in many religions, because we can see how many gurus or popes or whatever has, you know, they have got to this phase, they have the Citrinitas, they have the powers, they can go into people's minds and hearts and everything, but they are still going to fall from grace because they are not servants of the divine in most cases. And that's why it's so strange when a guru has been a very good maybe guru. I think about Sogyal Rinpoche, for example. I loved his book, this Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. I had it in Mexico when I had cholera and I was almost dying. It made me survive. But then comes this fall from grace, and we want to see lamas or gurus or something to be these divine incarnations. And that's a big problem, because sooner or later, often they fall from grace. So in alchemy, we don't see it. We have a guru, we can have a master alchemist, but often they are in the other world that we are working with. And we have to ask the right questions to get in contact and work with them. We have to know our tradition to get these opportunities. And we don't look for people outside to be this guru.
And obviously it helps working together.
Yeah.
Because then your partner can always point out that that might just may be the ego talking, or this may not be the end result. So we have this interchange and collaboration, both between ourselves in the both outer and inner perspective, but also in regards of the living archetypes, that there is always something more. And you can always reflect upon your life, and are the things in your life that you feel unhappy or unsatisfied with, well, then that's the key for you to work with, because you are not liberated from whatever that is. But having a partner that can always point things out, and when you believe that you have been able to explain something that no one else has explained, and your partner go like, yeah, I read that yesterday in my notebook, you understand that, you may be on the same path, but you are not the only one.
So humility is also key word in this Rubedo or Red Wedding or Solar Body. So and it is a very nice feeling also, the humility, the compassion, because then you can also sense that you are a part of the whole creation. You are a part of the whole cosmos in a way. And in the end, it's love that matters, not knowing or being able to have powers or recreate your life and environment. It's this flaming heart, like Tommy said, that is the most important expression for me anyway, and you, I think.
Yes, indeed.
Mm.
Yes.
This has been very interesting indeed. Perhaps I could ask many questions actually. Perhaps one last question, given the time we've taken. I wonder what the time scale for this sort of work is, not only in terms of one's progress through the paths, but also through the phases, but also the time one invests in practicing and doing the operations. Of course, if I think of the example of guitar playing, if you want to be a really good guitar player, then you have to practice a lot.
Yeah.
And there are no good guitar players who haven't played a lot of guitar. But then also the guitar teacher, who deals with students who have an interesting guitar, but don't have, for whatever reason, the causes and conditions to practice much. Maybe 5 or 10 minutes is good, because the student who comes to the guitar lesson is very different to the person practicing 3-4 hours a day or more. The latter really is the only one who has any hope of getting good at guitar, that's for sure. So I know that when asked the question of that, how much did you practice? In a sense, there are two kinds of answers. What do you tell the general student who might struggle to even do a little bit each day? And what's actually required to do it, which is another question entirely. So I'm more interested in the second type, what's actually needed to pull this off, than I am the first one. What do you tell people who struggle perhaps even to do a little bit each day?
We'll start with the first one because that's the easy question. Do something on a daily basis. It's much better to do something just a couple of minutes on a daily basis than postponing everything and then saying that on Saturday or Sunday I will set everything up and I will do this huge operation or meditation or contemplation. And if you train yourself to do things on a daily basis and not having certain days you can do longer, but minimum do something on a daily basis, whether that is a meditation practice, whether that is a prayer that you have written yourself to your deity. Enter your alchemical room when you go to bed during night. And the more you start doing those few minutes on a daily basis, and then certain times you can do more prolonged ways, the shift becomes when it's not an exercise, it's not something you separate from your daily life. It becomes a normal way of living. And if I don't put on my clothes in the morning, I will freeze. If I don't do my alchemical work in the morning, I won't be able to meet myself and the world.
But it takes some time to get to this level. It's the same as with meditation. When people start doing a meditation, you have to sit this long, you have to do that, and breathing exercises. But after a while, you can't live without meditation. So that's this is your way to stay healthy and sound in this turbulent world. But it takes some time and it takes some practice to come to that level. But when people are coming to that level, they want the creative, the fire is the secret fire is gone. But it takes very for one person, you have the talent, you have the intention, you have the focus, you have the time, the right time in your life. It's much more faster. And for other people, it's more, harvesting and, out on the field, you do it and you do it and you do it. But it's so wonderful to see that people, even if it's a bit hard work, they still continue to do it. And suddenly, the soil is fertilized and it happens things. So it's very different for all different people, but also we can feel that, because for me reincarnation is my truth, at least right now. You never know. But I can see that some people, they have the alchemical tradition within them, like we had when we started the alchemy. It was, picking up something you have done so long before for so many times. And for those people, they are so happy to connect to this alchemical tradition. Other people have, it takes longer time. But the big difference for us that when we started educate people, we really wanted people to get transformed and really living the alchemy. But now we don't judge people anymore because they have their way. And for some people, just to understand alchemy will transform them. For other people, just working with their feelings, that is being transforming. And some will do, the whole work.
So it's not only a question of how little can I do, but it's also a question of finding this balance. So people in the early stages tend to get extremely inflamed by the work, by being able to meditate, by being able to do the breathing exercises, the visualizations.
And understanding.
Invoking archetypal forces. That's the only thing they want to do, and they don't want to go to their mundane work. They don't want to spend time in the relationships, etc. This is the truth they have encountered that they want to fully embrace themselves in. And quite often they are involved in accidents on a physical level or on a psychological level, or something happens in their relationship with the world that forces them to also focus on other things. Because if the goal in alchemy, as in other traditions, is not to escape from reality, it's to embrace reality, we have to see everything within and without ourselves as a reflection. And we have certain of our students we want to infuse with more fire, with more spirit. You can do a little bit more. And other people, we have to try to lower their fire because they will burn themselves out if they continue in this pace. And that's finding this dynamic balancing point within ourselves is one of the first goals, so that we always do work and contemplation, but we don't it doesn't stop us from encountering everything around ourselves and within ourselves.
And about the education, it's a 3-year education. First we had 1 year, and then we had 2 years, and then we had 3 years, and we have had it for a time now, because we thought that it's no idea to start to practice alchemy if you don't have 3 years. That's a minimum. But that doesn't mean that when they are initiated to alchemists, that they are, fully trained, and we are not fully trained. That's the beginning point to start to working as living an alchemist in this world. But 3 years is a little bit like a minimum for having to learn the basics and transform the subtle bodies and the chakras and so on.
But from those 3 years, you could say that it can, in most cases, perhaps take up to 10, 15 years to have a true successful white wedding in the alchemical stage, where you are starting to transform this union mystica between the soul and spirit, between yourself and your guardian angel, between you as human and the divine, into a permanent state of consciousness. And what starts as glimpses, and then you're thrown back into reality, throughout the work and throughout the years, it becomes more and more permanent. So you actually are able to produce the white stone in alchemy, which is something that you can aspire to, but once it's a reality, things have changed forever in the way you encounter yourself and creation, and it's a new set of consciousness that is set like a stone, like the white stone. But that normally takes 15 years. And that requires 15 years of doing some kind of esoteric work on not a daily basis, but on every breathing in and breathing out. There can't be any separation between you and your profane or mundane life and your esoteric, alchemical, magical life. Everything has to become one, and you are becoming this influx and reflux of the divine source of creation. And we are working with, and have been working with people around the world for so many years, since the 90s, and achieving the white stone, well, that's 15, 20 years. And that's quite a good pace. For other people, it may take 30 years. And then obviously the white stone is not the end product. Then you have to transfigure that into the yellow stone, which is a new state of consciousness, which takes, it doesn't take, in our experience, the white stone is more difficult. It's easier to transfigure the white stone into the yellow stone than transforming consciousness into the white stone.
But it's also important to know, now we are explaining the alchemical opus like a linear process. In the end, it's not. But we do it for not to complicate things too much. So that's why, in the end, it's a spiral process. So you can get to realizations, you can drop them, and you can come back. And that's also why it's not a big idea to say, I've come to this phase and I've come to that phase, because in the end, it's not like that. It's all at the same time in a more cosmic level. But if you work with the subtle bodies and more get this permanent consciousness, when you die, you have it with you. When you come back, it's easy to take it back. So you have the gifts that are coming back to next life also, or coming back to whatever you do after you leave this reality for now. So that's why also to see, you don't have to go towards the end, but the gifts are going with you as long as you keep this wedding. You keep the förbund. Covenant, precis. But you are free to leave it whenever you want. But if you want, you can keep the wedding with you.
And it's a wonderful state of consciousness regarding, if you're talking about the weddings or the stones or the solar consciousness, when you come to this realization, this true, genuine realization that I have the rest of my life in this and perhaps other incarnations to fulfill this work, meaning I don't have 1 second to spare, because this is a work of love. This is the work of devotion. This is the work that embraces everything, and that's just magical.
And now you're all light.
You are enlightened, Steve.
Beautiful.
Just listening to you, I've already done it. Well, this has been so fascinating. Thank you both very much for this. And more can be read in Alchemy, the Divine Work. And of course, people can find you at your website. The links to all that are in the show notes below. Katarina Falkenberg and Tommy Westlund, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.